Data can help us personalize the experiences that we offer to each customer, but we still have to protect privacy. We're going to rename our industry. We're no longer going to be consumer insights. We're going to be human insights.
VOX wins. We all know that information is only as valuable as what you do with it. And today we're joined by someone who's written the playbook on turning insights into action. I'm excited to welcome Elizabeth Oates, managing partner and principal consultant at Knox Oates Foresights, with previous experience from Ulta Beauty, Kohl's, and General Mills. Elizabeth, your brand is captured in your book title, More Than Just Interesting. What inspired you to focus on building a career that drives real impact rather than just collecting interesting data?
Oh, I love that question. But first of all, thank you for having me, Richard. I'm looking forward to this discussion. I'm looking forward to being here and really talking about all sorts of things kind of across the spectrum about being more than just interesting. Okay, but to your question, what got me into this idea of being more than just interesting? Well, I came from 20 years on the client side of insights. And during that time, there was one particular moment where I was giving what I thought was a pretty fantastic insights presentation to a number of key stakeholders and cross-functional partners. And so I gave this presentation, and on the way out of the room, one of my partners stopped me and said, "Elizabeth, that was really interesting." And I was like, oh, no, I totally failed, because I'm not here to be interesting. I am here to push this business forward. And that was this pivot moment for me in my career about how I want to show up and the role I need to play for my business. So that was where this whole idea started. And it turned into a discussion about how to never be interesting, but evolved into a book that really is about me sharing my experiences. I call on some friends from the industry in the book, but we really talk about moving from being interesting to being actionable. And it's really all in service of pushing businesses forward, because that's really what we're here to do.
Yeah, and this is an untapped area. I think for longstanding viewers of the Vox Wins podcast, we always like to get little bits of career advice from everyone. But I think your lens really captures a lot of the cross-functional collaboration as well as career development that anyone can take on and have that autonomy over. So I think this is an area of our data set for any leaders to come and enjoy and come to us at voxwins.com, but one that we don't really get a chance to dive into on the podcast. So very excited to have you here.
Awesome.
One of the core frameworks in your book, you have these 4 steps of actionability. Could you break down how you apply this approach when working with clients who might be drowning in data, but starving for insights and making sense of it?
Yeah, you got it. And if you're feeling that idea of drowning in data, but starving for insights, you're not alone. And not that misery loves company, but there are some really actionable things that you can do to move into that insightful space and being, going from data rich and insight poor to really insight driving the business. And whether you're on the insight side or you're on the client side, wherever you sit, you have to start with aligning on the decision. What action are you going to take? It's about clarifying the decision that you're going to make, not just the data that you might want or feel like you need. It all starts with that thing that you're going to do. And I realize that sometimes it feels like putting the cart before the horse, right? But really, it's about understanding potential outcomes before you go and kind of try and boil the ocean with research. So if you want to conduct very focused research, you have to have an end decision in mind. So if you've aligned on what actions, can be taken, you can then focus on building strategies around what's in scope versus out of scope for action. And really, a focused research plan means that the research is going to become a springboard for action for the business, right? It's about embedding the insights into that decision-making process. So as the insights lead or as the insights folks, you really have to do that translation of insights into business action. And that can come through lots of different ways, including very concrete recommendations. But it can also mean things like working with your clients or your internal teams on integrating insights really directly into their strategies. This is where some insights leaders fall short. So don't let that be you. to be that springboard into action.
Love that. And I'm hearing really aligning with them ahead of time. So we are being very purposeful in all the information that we're collecting. So thinking about how you're partnering before and after, and making sure that all the data that you're collecting, the systems that you're setting up, you have that shared goal in mind. There's going to be, I guess, resistance when some of these insights then challenge the existing beliefs or strategies that you had first started to align with. How do you navigate those cross-functional tensions when the data points to a direction that kind of conflicts with your stakeholders' plan?
It's a great question, because that happens more frequently than we would like to admit sometimes, right, Richard? But really, all together, it all starts with trust. And it's building trust through cross-functional collaboration. We're going to talk about, development of personal ideas later, but and personal skills. But it starts with building relationships with your partners. And that relationship is one that, again, using that T word, is grounded in trust. And so if you can build that and have your partners know that you're here to be the unbiased voice of the customer, I don't show up as Elizabeth. I show up as the customer, or as the guest, right? Or as the member. And so it's really, if the team can trust that you're here to tell, the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, well, that's something that they can trust. And when that happens, and when you've built trust with your partners, you can bring what can sometimes feel like bad news, right? And in that case, rather than being shut out or having that door shut on you, your partners will start to ask questions more like, why is that? Instead of thanks but no thanks, it'll be more of, what can we do because of that? What are our options, and how do we go forward from there? So again, building that trust, because sometimes you have to say, ugh, this ended up being a bad idea, or ugh, it's not as great as we thought it was, or oof, maybe we shouldn't go ahead with that plan. But inaction can actually be a positive thing for the business. I've worked in businesses where I've had to tell the brand teams, hey, sorry, it's not going to work. But that was actually the best answer for the business, because it meant we didn't invest in something that cost the business a lot of money. So it's still business forward. It's still customer centric, but it's all grounded in the trust that you, as the insights lead, are the unbiased voice of the guest.
But I also know that you take that perspective, and it's not just for how you work with members of your team, but those who might be the extended members of your team. And of course, I'm here at VOX. I'm going to think about the vendor side, because I know you've mentioned wanting to be everyone's favorite client when working with these sort of third-party attachments as you're building out a team, which I think is kind of, well, refreshing for us, because we would love to see both sides of this market work better together. But also better in a time where I think any leader is really just going to focus on, how can I extract value? We have a contractual agreement. Give me this tool so I can help my customer. But it's more powerful, I think, when the two are really working and aligned. Can you share a little bit on how that partnership mentality kind of looks like when you put it into practice?
Yeah, you're right. This is a mentality about partnership. It's a philosophy about how to win all together, right? And really, I think, if I'm someone I put myself in my partner's shoes, right? I know that they're going to do their best work if A, they don't have to gear up when I call, like, oh, it's Elizabeth. And also B, if I'm actually someone who is fun and productive to work with, right? So I don't want anyone like pre-hanging up on me, but also I want everyone's best work. And we'll all do that if we can really, build partnerships together. So, I hate to use that T trust word again, but really building mutual trust and value with partners. You just want to be a partner for more than your internal teams. It's your external teams as well. And it's not not about giving up power. It's not about giving up your role. But what it does mean is that it means that you're giving your external partners a chance to help you drive your agenda, which is hopefully to drive consumer centricity. But it's really about having someone else help you succeed and push your team forward. And I think it all happens, in the context of transparent communication and expectations, right? On the client side, things change all the time. And if you can be honest and help your vendor partners know, what's changing, why it's changing, how it's changing, what it means for whatever project you've got going on, they can help you and your team, as well as their teams, adapt and adjust. So now if you're quiet or you're hidden about it, you're going to end up wasting your money and their time. And that doesn't feel good for anyone, and it doesn't result in great work for anyone either. So I think this is a win-win when we can be really great partners with our vendors.
I think I can hear some of our customers clapping in applause, even from here, and maybe a couple of vendors and salespeople down in the comments of our LinkedIn post. I can see if I can break the fourth wall and see them. Now, Elizabeth, you've spent your career elevating the role of insights across major brands. I'd love to hear a hot take, if possible, maybe just a bold prediction you have about the future of consumer insights, maybe that one that surprises your industry peers.
You got it. All right. I hate to use the buzz phrase, but AI. Oh gosh. AI is here, Richard. It's not going away. And my hot take is that in this new space, the role of insights is only going to get more important in the age of AI. AI is going to bring us new tools. It's going to help us work more effectively and more efficiently. And that's awesome. And here, I usually say and, but here I'm going to say but we will still need insights teams to drive human understanding and connection to the business. So I think this is the time where I say, hey, if you're in insights, step up. Leverage this new tool. It's not going to take your job unless you sit still. If you act now, it'll allow you to spend more time doing the really value add work for your business. And so if I can I have two hot takes, Richard?
Give us a second one.
Okay, that was part A. Part B is I think that, we're talking about the age of AI. And, within that space, we're saying insights is more important because it's about humans at the center. I think my second hot take is that we're going to rename our industry. We're no longer going to be consumer insights. We're going to be human insights because it's the human at the center, right? It's not a shopper. It's not a customer. It's not a member. It's a human. So my crystal ball says, we're gonna rename our industry.
So maybe to take off a little bit of the pressure, take us down from habanero to jalapeno. What would be, I guess, an underrated skill set in all these new use cases in technology we're talking about in context? What's an underrated skill set you think insight leaders should never underestimate?
Oh, love this question, Richard. And my first and I think easy answer here is truth seeking. So there is more data available than ever before, right? But more data does not mean more insight. So that ability to uncover the truth within the data will only become more and more valuable. Plus, with the complexity of being a human at this moment in time, oftentimes people are not able to always express their whys. Like I can't just say, hey, Richard, what's your unmet need, right? Right? So discovering those whys, all those things that drive meaningful strategy and differentiation and transformational growth will need extra attention. So that truth-seeking ability is very much something that we can't underestimate going forward.
Fair. Good case. Good case. Of course, the issue at the heart of VOX is leader preferences for how and when they work with vendors. So, Elizabeth, you've been on both sides of this equation. What qualities make a vendor stand out to you, and how can they best support leaders who are navigating today's complex retail landscape?
Yeah, ultimately, Richard, the best vendors make my job easier if I'm a client by simplifying complexity, delivering clarity, and helping me drive business impact. Now, a couple of examples on how vendors can help me do that is one, really truly having deep business understanding. It's not just about delivering data, it's about understanding my businesses and the challenges that I face in reaching my objectives. Right? So what are those hurdles that my business uniquely has? I know we're all unicorns, but in all seriousness too, what are those unique challenges that I face and how can you help me overcome those obstacles? The second one, as we talked about partnership earlier, having that partnership mentality, vendors who act as strategic partners and not just Service providers really stand out. That's where you're building that kind of, I say partner a lot, but really because that's a very purposeful word. I'm not looking for a vendor, I'm looking for a partner. So it means being proactive. It means anticipating needs and even offering recommendations rather than just responding to requests, right? Being proactive there too. And then I think, the third and of all of those two, using that T word again, trust, but also transparency. In today's retail landscape, decisions have to be made so quickly. So I really value vendor partners who are upfront about whether it's a methodology, a capability, or even a limitation, right? Just being upfront and transparent about it is really important because it really builds that foundation of trust. And, that leads into honesty about what data is and can and can't do, right? And that's all important so that we make really smart choices as the business.
AI adoption promises to enhance the customer journey, but there may be trade-offs worth considering, especially in the context of how we're forming alliances with those cross-functional partners. How do you either work with those partners or work with clients on maintaining the right balance between necessary friction in the customer journey, like requesting two-factor authorization, and then delivering that seamless omni experience, one step till purchase? How do you make sense of both of those that are kind of inherently at odds?
I think about consumer centricity in two ways. One is the things that consumers actually see, how you bring your business, your goods, your services, your products to life for consumers. The second way is about how you make choices based on having consumers in mind. And in that second case, consumers may not always see the actions that you're taking in order to be consumer centric. And I think I think you bring up a really good example of two-factor authentication, because that's one where you're making a choice that is very likely consumer-centric. You're helping with data security for your guests, and that's incredibly important. Now, they might not see you making that choice, and actually what they might see is something that's like, gee, thanks for the extra step. Now it's even harder to shop with you, right? So we have to be very, transparent with our customers in that case to say, hey, we're doing this because we value your data and your data security. And no one's going to argue with data security, right? So it's about saying why in some cases, not just, hey, Richard, please take this extra step. It's about, hey, Richard, we value your data security, so we're asking you to help us by doing this thing. That is the place where you kind of create that bridge between that, doing what's right. And, even if you're adding necessary friction, if it's all in service of what's right for the guest, be transparent about it because the guest will value that.
Transparency and trust for everyone. It's a great heuristic to take. I'll pull again from your book. I'm curious about the 9 critical skills that you outline for insight professionals. Which of these skills do you see as the most critical when it comes to this particular challenges when you're balancing security or building that great customer-centric experience and, again, working behind the scenes, which your client may or may not always see?
Okay, now you're asking me to choose among my favorite children. No, I'm just kidding. No, but in all seriousness, I love this question because we, as insights professionals, we need to be business strategists going forward, not just driving insights, but really driving the business. And so a couple of the skills that I would bring up here, especially in this case of how you are driving consumer centricity, even if someone's not seeing it. First and foremost, business acumen. Know what's right for your business, right? If you don't understand that something like two-factor authentication is helpful for your business because it makes sure that your customer's data is secure, you won't understand why you need to ask your customer to take this extra step. And you'll just say, no, 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 right? So having that business acumen to say, why are we considering some of these business actions will really take you a long way in ensuring that everything you bring forward is right for the business and right for the customer. The second thing I would bring up here is really about strategic foresight and planning. And what does that really mean? It's really about anticipating future needs for the business, right? We think about an insights team, you think about, okay, if we're all driving a car, we've got a couple of tools to help us see what's around us and what the context that we're sitting in is, right? We've got this thing called a rearview mirror, and it helps us understand where we've been and how we've gotten here. we also have a windshield. And looking through that tool, we can see what's ahead. What future things do we have to navigate, and how do we navigate them, right? How do we go through the future? And one relative to the other, well, your rearview mirror is about this big and your windshield is like this big, right? So let's make sure we take that analogy into practice and really anticipate what's coming ahead. So if you can think about, what's happening in 3 to 5 years from now and start doing your insight work to help you plan for that, you'll be less looking through the rearview mirror or trying to just catch up as you go, and really able to help your business plan ahead so that we can actually take meaningful action and meet customers where they are at that point.
Talk so well around, and using this example of, necessary friction to protect your customers from a data breach, which if it comes out would completely kill trust in your brand. And while continuing to look ahead, how do you see the relationship between consumer data collection and trust evolving? Like, are there innovations or approaches that might help reduce the tension between personalization and privacy?
Great question, Richard. I think as we think about this idea between personalization and privacy, there really are what feel like they're at odds, because from a personalization standpoint, we need to give every customer a unique experience. No two customers are alike. I've done a heck of a lot of segmentations, right? But even in those, no two customers are exactly the same, and they might need something different from our business. So data can help us personalize the experiences that we offer to each customer, but we still have to protect privacy. And here's how it might come to life. Like, let's say you're a retailer and you have someone come into your store. Well, it's not the store's corporate data person that's talking to the customer. It might likely be someone on the front lines, right? So someone working in the store. How do you enable that person to have enough information to help Elizabeth without saying, oh, we've just given Elizabeth's information to every person in every store so that they can, wherever she walks in at whatever moment, that we can help her. So I think there are some unanswered opportunities about future data collection and data security that will enable personalization in the moment. I think we're getting better and better at it online. It's that in-person interaction. We talked about omni before, and really having that omni experience is something that we'll have to figure our way through when it comes to providing enough data to create personalization opportunities, but with enough security that we all feel good about it, right? So it's about, making security part of how your brand operates. If you're from the branding side, like I am too, you'll talk about your brand promise. And one of the things that you're going to need to start promising as a brand in the future is security.
You make a really good point, and just as an observer of the host of this podcast, it's been a reoccurring theme that retail leaders are the ones who are the responsible gatekeepers, thinking a little bit more cynically about, okay, I can take on the hype and the promise and the dream of all the AI tools, but really are going to be the only ones kind of representing us, the consumers on the other end. I want to pull a little bit of a thread back when we talked about proactive communication being the way that you can help consumers understand some of the decisions you're making behind the scenes. Like, why do we need another step for me to pull out my 2FA app on my phone? How can companies then effectively communicate their value to customers who might just see a lot of the data or action as an inconvenience?
This is a really important area for us to kind of work through and consider as we go forward in this space right now, in this context today. And I'd start with, I think you're absolutely spot on, Richard, with the idea that retail leaders have to value and kind of find themselves on this spectrum of, a skepticism about how we might do it, but also optimism about what it could do if we get it right? So we have to walk that spectrum and walk that line really carefully. And so to your point, exactly, strategies for educating consumers on why we're doing what we're doing is going to be critically important. As businesses and retailers, we've taught consumers many things over the last decades, right? We've taught them that, hey, if you give me your phone number or your email, I can send you incentives to come back to the store, right? Or if you give me this information, I can give you this, give you this thing. So there has been this idea of a two-way dialogue started. And so I think if we lean in to what we've already learned from how we've communicated, like why you should sign up for this program or why you should give us this information, we can also start to communicate why you should help us do this securely and what you'll get out of it or what you won't have to worry about if you do.
I always like to wrap up by shining a light on some big wins of our guests, those war stories where you put out a fire or build something uniquely difficult. Elizabeth, could you share a story where your team faced significant hurdles and how you overcame them?
So when I think about a really big win, it's really about transformation. One of the biggest transformations I've led was moving from what I'll call an insight team that was more like a deli counter model, one where a stakeholder would take a number, and when we call your number, or you can request data, and then you can wait for a response when we get back to you. That's cool, right? All the way into, from that into a consumer centricity center of excellence. Now, in that deli counter phase where you're picking a number and waiting to be called, sometimes business partners would come to the team and ask them really narrowly defined requests like, hey, which of these two ad copies is better? Or can you go and survey customers about which of these two brands they prefer? And in that case, the team was overwhelmed fulfilling orders instead of shaping decisions. And it's not because the team wasn't talented. I mean, wow, were they ever talented? And they were really passionate about guiding the business. But because the insights didn't have the opportunity to be proactively driving the conversation, they weren't really seen as that essential, to strategy. And so we know that had to change. And we really set out to reposition the team as a strategic force, moving from passive data providers all the way to active drivers of enterprise decision making. And the first step in doing that was embedding insights into the business strategy rather than waiting to be called upon. So instead of answering isolated questions, we structured insights around the company's biggest priorities, and we framed our work in terms of business impact. So what's important to the company? That's important to us, right? How does the business want to hear about it? We got to think about that impact, right? So we stopped handing over numbers and handing over reports and started telling compelling stories that made customer needs really impossible to ignore. So when we changed how the team worked, it also meant that we weren't just sitting on the sidelines. We were really embedding ourselves into leadership conversations and proactively bringing forward things like trends and recommendations before stakeholders even knew that they needed them. And we built this process to ensure that insights were integrated at the earliest stages of decision making and really not at all just a validation after the fact. We're not here to prove anybody right. We're here to help the business move forward. So over time, that shift really completely changed how the organization viewed insights. And leadership wasn't just consuming data, they were really relying and leaning on the insights to guide strategy. I think all in, like the real big takeaway here, Richard, is that consumer centricity isn't just about collecting data. It's ensuring that data feels real, customer-driven decisions at every level of the business. When insights teams take ownership of that role, they don't just support the business, but they shape its future.
That's all I love. I mean, I love that not just because I'm someone who used to work at a deli very long time ago and have seen a lunch rush several times in my life. Love that ownership piece. Because the only way to get there is to really level up the subject matter expertise of the field. Are you going to ask the right questions that the other stakeholders are going to be asking? And that's a great way to align. And like you said, not in a way where it's like, oh, I'm always getting the answers that I'm looking for. maybe there's some confirmation bias. Maybe they feel that they are now becoming a monolith onto themselves and they can lead and take control of the entire conversation around strategy and what the insights team is doing, but rather an opportunity to show and earn respect by the team by starting to think as an owner on the other side. All right, one last question for you. There are senior managers watching this right now who are going to become the next cohort of retail leaders. You've given them already, I think, tons of content on how to shape their career, work with other stakeholders. I'm probably being a little bit too greedy then by throwing this question in, but I ask it to all of our guests, so I have to. Is there any other nugget of career advice that you would offer them?
I'm happy to jump in with an idea here for career advice, Richard. And my advice would be to find the place where your passion intersects with your talent. And what does that mean? It's that place that you find that you love to do the work you do, and also you're really good at it, because at that intersection, you'll do your best work. If you can sit at that intersection, it won't feel like work. And if you can find that intersection, you will go as far as you want and as far as you can possibly go, because it's leveraging both what you love and what you do well.
I mean, did I mention I used to work at a deli? I've taken such a weird path in my career, but I think I've been guided by just that very, very principle. I knew I wanted to work in tech. I'm not an engineer. I'm not a PM. I'm a people person. And look, I've really enjoyed my pivot since then. And look at us now. So yes, I very much follow your advice. And I think that's a wonderful step. And I hope other people really take that to heart. That's all the time we have. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back next week as we uncover more of the evolving retail landscape and understand the consensus voice of its leaders. Because of all else, VOX wins.